Carthens.
That's correct.
Were arrest warrants taken out for this defendant?
That's correct.
Was the defendant arrested to your knowledge?
That's correct.
Jail, could you have the person in the jail courtroom stand up and lower his mask? Can they step up, please? Yeah. Like step onto the whatever that is. Yes. Do you see the person that you knew as Norman Carthens here in the courtroom today? And if so, could you please describe what he's wearing?
I do see him. He's in an orange jumpsuit, white t-shirt.
And do you understand that we're here today for this defendant's preliminary hearing? Jail, he may be seated.
That's correct. I do understand.
And there were a total of 6 warrants, as the court just read: terroristic threats, disorderly conduct, aggravated assault upon a police officer, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and misdemeanor obstruction of law enforcement officer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did the facts as alleged in these warrants all occur in DeKalb County?
That's correct.
Will you please tell the court the facts that led up to you taking these warrants out against this defendant?
Not a problem. Our patrol officers received a call for service at the Hilton Garden Inn, the hotel located at 1501 Lake Hearn Drive. That was on May 22nd of this year. It was around 4:40 p.m., 4:38, I believe is what it was. Officer North responded to that location. He made contact with the hotel manager. It was a male hotel manager. The hotel manager informed him that there had recently, in the past 15, 20 minutes or so, there had been a male inside the hotel, was not a guest, was not a customer, as far as staying in the hotel. That manager encountered that male. That male was irate, made belligerent statements, and he actually threatened that manager himself before leaving the hotel. The manager advised that the subject, he was later identified to be Mr. Carthens after we made contact with him. So just for purposes of the hearing, it's easier for me to say Carthens. Carthens was alleged to have said, made statements like, "These cracker ass people are gonna stop following me around. All of them are part of the KKK. I'm going to take care of all this bullshit. These motherfuckers gonna wonder what happened." He was making statements such as that while in the hotel lobby. That was the reason for the hotel manager actually making contact with him and basically telling him he had to leave the property. In the process of telling the hotel manager that he had to leave the property, trying to find the exact statement that he made. Give me 1 second. After being told he had to leave the property, he couldn't talk like that. Carthens actually told the hotel manager, "You can't tell me what I'm going to do. I'll do what I want to do. I might let you live." He also stated, told the hotel manager himself that he was going to blow his brains out later. And he also told him that he was going to split his wig. Ultimately, Carthens did walk away from the hotel. He was last known to have been headed south on Ashford Dunwoody Road. This hotel is located near Ashford Dunwoody at I-285. So after the Officer North responded to the location, obtained the information I just stated, he also received the description of Mr. Carthens. He was said to have been wearing, let me find his exact description. He was said to have been wearing, he was a black male that was wearing a gray cap, a white shirt, a blue hoodie, and gray sweatpants. Officer North then began driving the area, and not too far south on Ashford Dunwoody Road, he did observe a male matching that description. He parked his patrol vehicle. He approached Mr. Carthens, and immediately upon approaching Mr. Carthens, he told Officer North that he was being followed. He then began rambling and made additional statements. Immediately, Officer North asked him, based on the information that he had been provided, I did not mention it, but also in the information I mentioned, the hotel manager also stated that there appeared to be a large bulge in Mr. Carthen's front, in one of his pockets. And he also said during his encounter with Carthen's, he kept favoring that pocket or reaching into that pocket. So when Officer North made contact with Carthen's, his immediate concern was to ensure that there were no weapons present, and if they were, to secure those weapons. He asked immediately, Officer North asked Mr. Carthen's if he had any weapons on him. He did not specifically answer that question, and he actually became upset. Officer North then made additional attempts to ensure or just to check to see if Carthen's had any weapons on his person, but he was unwilling to allow Officer North to do so. There was a secondary witness at the hotel that corroborated the statements made by the hotel manager. That secondary witness was also a hotel employee. So after being unwilling to allow Officer North to confirm this, if there were any weapons present, Carthen's also actually responded in the process. Officer North made several attempts. He even made statements specifically stating that he just wanted to make sure he didn't have any weapons. Carthen's responded, "I'm telling you that I need a weapon." And he later during their encounter stated, "You're gonna have to tase me." This was after he voiced complete opposition to complying with Officer North wanting to check to see if he had any weapons. Ultimately, due to the information Officer North was given at the hotel, he made a determination to go ahead and place Carthen's in handcuffs to take him into custody. As he was attempting to do so, Carthen's immediately pulled away from Officer North. And Officer North at that point pulled out his taser and attempted to tase Carthen's, but it had no effect whatsoever. In that exact moment, Carthen's actually pulled out a handgun from his right pocket, it appeared to be. At that moment, Officer North realized Carthen's had a handgun. He was in an offensive posture, only a couple of feet away from Officer North at that time. So Officer North immediately started yelling, "Gun, gun, gun," discharged a couple rounds, and took cover behind a tree that was nearby. Carthen's appeared to he ran behind a vehicle. This encounter with Carthen's occurred in the driveway of a residence on Ashford Dunwoody Road. There was an SUV parked in that driveway. Carthen's immediately ran behind that SUV. Officer North, from behind cover, from behind that tree, several times yelled out to Carthen's for him to drop the gun, for him to throw the gun out, to drop the gun. And you can hear Carthen specifically stating no, along with him making other statements. After several moments, additional officers arrived on scene, and Carthen's began complying with commands at that time. He threw the gun out from behind the vehicle. He tossed it into the grass nearby, and he laid down on the ground, and he was taken into custody at that time. Trying to see if we did check Carthen's criminal history. He was found to have a criminal history that included him being a convicted felon, which was the reason for that possession of a firearm by a convicted felon charge. When we were doing some more follow-up investigation, we were able to obtain video footage from the hotel. Video footage showed there to be an encounter between Carthen's and hotel staff. There was also a video that was actually recorded by the hotel employee that witnessed the incident. She was also the 911 caller in the case. We were able to obtain all of that video footage. And during additional follow-up, the gun that was in Carthen's possession, we actually found that it had recently been reported stolen from Emory Hospital nearby. And while looking into the details of the theft, we actually found that Carthen's was a patient at that location the same date the theft was reported. Ultimately, after Carthen's had been taken into custody at that time, he was checked out by EMS on scene. He was not struck by the gunfire. He did not have any injuries that were found related to this incident. He was EMS on scene actually checked him out, said he was fine, but we still transported him to Northside Hospital just to be on the safe side. At the hospital, Carthen's became uncooperative with medical staff. He was ultimately discharged. And initially, upon his discharge, the officer that was sitting with him present, he was uncooperative, didn't want to comply with commands, was unwilling to place his hands behind his back at that time. But once additional security personnel was called at the hospital, he complied, and he was then later transported to the DeKalb County Jail.
Okay. So I just want to go back and make sure that I have a couple of details. The employee of the hotel that witnessed the incident was actually the 911 caller.
There was one main employee that was involved. He was a manager. He had the direct encounter with Carthens. There was an additional employee that witnessed it, and yes, that was the 911 caller.
Okay. And as far as like the 911 call that would be captured and would be added to this file, is that correct?
Correct.
And when Officer North initially responded to the location, did he have body worn camera activated?
He did. I reviewed that body worn camera footage and was able to observe his encounter with that manager that was the directly involved in speaking with Carthens.
And to your knowledge, that's been preserved.
It has.
And then you also stated you all were able to get surveillance footage from the hotel of the interaction between the defendant and the hotel manager. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on that surveillance footage, were you able to clearly see the defendant in the footage?
That's correct. He was the same individual that Officer North later encountered walking on Astro Dunwoody Road.
And was he wearing the same clothes that had been described?
He was.
Okay. And so so the defendant had made physical threats, death threats to the manager. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And he was hostile and irate while in the hotel. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what prompted the manager to actually begin speaking with him.
And then they asked him to leave the hotel. Did he immediately respond and leave the hotel?
He did not immediately do so. There became some back and forth, and that's when additional statements and threats were made. He did leave before officers arrived, but he did not immediately leave when asked to do so.
And it was also during this interaction that the manager observed a bulge from the defendant's pocket that the defendant was favoring during this interaction. Is that correct?
Correct. He described it as his pocket appearing to be weighted as if there was something heavy in it. And he did say that the defendant reached in his pocket a couple times during their encounter. Because of that, he felt that the defendant had a weapon. So that caused him to act in a certain manner because he feared for his safety.
Okay. And so Officer North then began to canvass the area to investigate what had been told to him. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And located the defendant.
That's correct.
The defendant was uncooperative with the officer.
That's correct.
And so at what point did the officer, and for what reason did the officer determine that he was going to detain the defendant?
Well, the initial information provided said that he possibly was in possession of a weapon. There were corroborated threats made to hotel employees. So after the defendant not being willing to allow the officer to pat him down to ensure there were no weapons present, ultimately, Officer North made the determination to take him into custody to detain him at that time. And once he tried to detain him and place him in the handcuffs, that's when things got out of control. That's when, as I mentioned earlier, the defendant pulled away from the officer. And at that point, he actually pulled the firearm out of his pocket.
Okay. And so when the defendant pulled away from the officer, was he like backing down? Like, was he moving away from the officer? Like, exactly what was he doing when he was pulling away from the officer?
He pulled away to simply prevent being placed in handcuffs. That's apparent from the interaction from the body cam footage. But immediately after pulling away to prevent being placed in handcuffs, that's when he pulled the firearm out of his pocket. And it looks like he assumed sort of, I guess you would say, an offensive posture. He was only 2 to 3 feet or so maybe away from the officer. Initially, after pulling away, the officer had drew his taser because his primary concern was just, hey, place him in handcuffs, detain him. But while tasing him, the tasing was ineffective, and it happened very quickly, and it was simultaneous essentially. But while tasing him, again, it was ineffective. It had no effect whatsoever. In that exact moment, the defendant also pulled the handgun out of his pocket. And that's when the officer realized the defendant pulled a handgun. So the officer then drew his weapon, and while taking cover behind a nearby tree, also discharged a couple rounds.
And was the officer wearing like an official uniform? Was he clearly identified as an officer?
He was. He had our standard police Brookhaven patrol issue uniform.
Okay. And did the defendant point the firearm at the officer?
Initially, I can only see from the body cam footage that the firearm was pulled out of the pocket. Then again, that was immediately as it took place.
Mm-hmm.
The officer, once he saw it, then turns away because he's fearing for his safety as well. And at that point, you can't see it from body cam that it's pointed, but you can't see it from body cam.
But the direction of the body cam doesn't. Is it in the direction of the defendant? Would it have shown that?
Repeat that question for me. I'm sorry.
So, like the view of the body cam, would it have directly shown the defendant with pointing the firearm, or was the body cam like positioned in a way where it was kind of not showing that?
Correct. The body cam, once the officer attempted to get cover behind that tree, the body cam changes direction. Body cam shows when the gun is initially pulled out, but once the officer attempts to change position, that's when body cam actually changes position and you can no longer see the defendant.
Okay. And so the officer is asking the defendant to relinquish the firearm, and the defendant is responding no.
Correct. He made several, it's numerous.
Okay. And when you all ran the defendant's information, you stated that you found that he was a convicted felon. Do you recall like any recent felony convictions?
I do not recall the specific charge or when the charge was, but it is documented on his criminal history. And it was confirmed that he was a convicted felon at the time I reviewed it. Was
that included in the warrants to your knowledge?
It should have been. Normally we do include that.
Okay. And you stated that one of the employees also took a video of the interaction between the manager and the defendant.
That's correct. That was that witness, the employee that called 911.
Have you been able to obtain that video as well?
I have.
Okay.
It shows a brief portion of the encounter. You can somewhat make out what's being said at some portions, and some portions you can't. But it just confirms that there was an encounter that pretty much occurred at the hotel.
Okay. And so at this point, you all have the video surveillance from the hotel. You have the video surveillance that the employee recorded, and then also Officer North's body worn camera. Were any other officers, did they respond to the scene? Any other officers respond to the scene? Sorry, that's what I'm asking.
There were additional officers that responded. That's once the additional officers responded on scene, it appears that's what prompted the defendant to actually begin complying with commands. He wasn't taken into custody until additional officers arrived on scene.
Okay. And do you recall any of the additional officers that had arrived on scene, or would that information be included in the police report?
That information is in the report. I don't have a full account of those officers by name right this second, but those officers were wearing body cam footage and have completed reports documenting such.
And were there any other witnesses to this incident that you all spoke with at the hotel, or that you all spoke with that may have saw the interaction on the Ashford Dunwoody?
There were additional witnesses in the area. As I stated, this encounter occurred in the front yard of a residence on Ashford Dunwoody. We spoke with both residents that live at that home. We also spoke with, there were additional residents or witnesses in the immediate area that were spoken with that had brief portions of information to provide that pretty much observed Officer North roadside, because his encounter happened in the front yard of that home, but directly on the side of Ashford Dunwoody Road. So there were residents and motorists that passed by that were concerned because they saw the officer's encounter with the defendant.
Did any witnesses stop, or any witnesses like actually physically present?
Yes, there was one witness that stopped. There was a male individual that stopped because this was prior to the Officer North drawing his taser or anything like that. There was a witness that I guess stopped to assist Officer North because he saw there was some sort of a struggle. That once the defendant became, it was apparent he became defiant, essentially, uncooperative, but around the same time that witness stopped, that's when the defendant pulled away from the officer and pulled a handgun out. Officer North then started yelling, "Gun, gun, gun," and that witness actually vacated the area.
Okay. And like the witnesses that you were able to speak with, were you able to get like audio recorded statements, or were their statements captured on body worn camera to your knowledge?
We were able to speak with some of the witnesses, not all, and we were able to obtain information from them, yes.
Okay. And like, was those audio recorded, or were they captured on body worn camera?
I'm not sure of all of the statements, but some of them were captured on audio and body worn body cam footage. Some were written statements as well.
And would those be included in the file for this case?
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions at this time for this witness, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Howard, what's the name of the manager who was involved in the initial altercation? If you'd rather put that name in the chat, we don't have an objection to that.
Yeah, we would ask that you would put the name in the chat and not say it on YouTube.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's why I didn't.
The victim actually watching via YouTube. So
no problem. That's why I didn't speak on it earlier. I'm typing it now.
Thank you. And while you're in that process, if you could also put the name of the hotel employee that recorded the video and called 911, as well as the names of any witnesses, lay witnesses that were interviewed that you have their names of.
Okay. So I don't have complete information in front of me right now, but what I do have, I will provide.
Thank you.
The two names I'm putting right now are, the first is the manager, and the second is the hotel employee.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second. I'm looking to see what else I have just readily available.
And were any other employees interviewed other than the two people that you put in the chat already? Anybody else that works at the Hilton Garden Inn?
Those are the only two employees interviewed about this incident specifically.
Okay. And the surveillance video from the hotel, that has audio on it?
I know the audio is on the body cam, or excuse me, the recording that was made by the hotel employee. Okay. I don't recall off the top of my head if there's audio on the hotel footage. Okay. There may be, but I'm not certain at this exact moment. I don't recall if.
And the altercation that you see on the surveillance video from the hotel, is that in the lobby area or is that somewhere else?
It's in the hotel lobby, the main common area when you walk into the hotel.
And the hotel actually has a restaurant and bar inside of it, right?
It does. So
people who aren't necessarily guests at the hotel are able to come in and avail themselves of that establishment.
That's correct.
Okay. Were there any altercations or anything happen in the bar or restaurant area of the hotel that you're aware of?
Altercations as far as
verbal or otherwise, anything anybody told you about an incident occurring in that area versus just the lobby?
I mean, it's all primarily the same area. I mean, it's only separated maybe by like a column or something like that. Okay. But prior to the incident involving the manager, no. The defendant was actually overheard, possibly on the phone. They're not certain if he was actually on the phone, but he was overheard on the phone, speaking loudly. He was using profanity, and it appeared to have an irate conversation, so to speak. So that's what prompted the manager to actually initiate contact with him.
Okay. And were any guests either in the bar, restaurant area or lobby interviewed as well?
Ms. McCurry, I'm
Uh,
going to have you pause. I see Mr. Carthen standing at the podium. Is there a reason that he's standing at the podium?
I'm writing something down.
He's writing something down. Okay, you can continue.
Thank you, Judge. And if Mr. Carthens needs to speak with me before I conclude, I'd just ask for a brief breakout. If he doesn't need to, we'll keep moving, but I'll keep going for now. I'm sorry. And the other witness that you put in the chat for me, Detective Howard, is that somebody who is at the hotel or somebody who witnessed what occurred outside the residence?
she's a nearby resident on Ashford Dunwoody that occurred, observed what happened on the roadway.
Was she a resident of the house where it occurred in the yard or just a passerby?
She was a passerby.
Okay.
I'm trying to actually find the names of the,
Sure.
with respect to the meeting kind of takes precedent. I don't want to dive too deep, so.
Sure. And I'll keep asking questions as you peruse your
Yeah,
notes.
no problem, no problem.
Do you know what, if at any point Officer North or when he called for backup?
He actually asked for another unit. If I recall correctly from watching his body cam footage, he asked for another unit almost immediately after he located Mr. Carthens, before he actually spoke with him.
Okay. And do you know approximately how long it took from the 911 call until Officer North arrived?
I don't have that number between the 911 call to his arrival at the hotel. I don't have that number right here in front of me.
Okay. And do you know how long it took from when Officer North asked for backup to actually arrive? Approximately?
I don't have that number in front of me. I can tell you that from the time Officer North spoke with the hotel manager to the time he located the defendant, it was approximately 3 minutes. I can't tell you that. And at the time Officer North made contact with the hotel manager told Officer North that the defendant had left the hotel, had been gone from the hotel for approximately 5 minutes.
Okay.
All right, I think this picture is small, but I believe Mr. Carthens is raising his hand.
Yes, ma'am.
Judge,
All right.
if I could briefly go into a breakout room with Mr. Carthens.
Yes, go ahead.
Actually, not sure what just happened. I went into the breakout room, then it just kicked me out of the breakout room.
Yeah, same.
Okay, let me try that.
Okay. Yeah, because it should have moved you guys. It's weird on this side. So it was popping you back into the one you went in the first time, but I have to move you to another one.
Gotcha.
So that's what was happening.
Okay, no problem.
But the
Thank you.
jail is in the correct one now. So it should
Okay.
get you guys there.
Thanks. And we're ready to proceed as soon as the jail's back in here.
I just closed the breakout room, so they should be back in just a moment.
All right, I see Mr. Carthens is back in the courtroom.
Yes.
He's had opportunity to speak with his attorneys.
Thank you, Judge.
We'll proceed.
Thank you. And Detective Howard, the surveillance video from the hotel, did you actually get a copy of that on like a CD or a thumb drive or anything, or do you just have it recorded on body cam, that video?
We have that video uploaded to our evidence server.
Okay. The actual video itself.
The video itself, yes, ma'am.
And same for the recording from the hotel employee?
The recording was on her phone, so it was just the phone recording sent to us.
Okay,
It's
so-
uploaded to our evidence server, but I missed the recording from her phone.
Sure. And do you know if the residents where this occurred out in front of, if they had a Ring camera or a Nest camera or anything of that nature?
They did not.
Okay. Any houses nearby have any sort of Ring or Nest cameras?
Not that were of use in this incident, no, ma'am.
Okay. And those initial statements that you said the manager said Mr. Carthens had made in the hotel lobby about people following him, is that right?
That's correct. He made statements such as that several times, it appears, throughout his encounter with hotel management and law enforcement that day. When I actually was still at our police headquarters as this incident occurred.
Mhm.
I heard off the radio traffic and responded to the location. I was the on-call detective that week anyway. So I would have had to go regardless. But when I arrived on scene, Mr. Carthens had already been taken into custody, and he made statements similar to that in my presence when I arrived on scene.
Okay. So something paranoia sounding like
Essentially, said people were following him out to get him. He even at one point made a statement such as Officer North was working with the people that were out to get him.
in your view of the body cam in your investigation, no weapon was ever pulled out by Mr. Carthen until after he had been tased by Officer North, or attempted to be tased by Officer North.
Like I said, everything was kind of simultaneous, but
Mhm.
it was around. Everything happened in that moment after he was Officer North attempted to place him into custody, take him into custody, detain him. He pulled away, and as he pulled away, the tasing and the weapon pulling essentially happened pretty much almost at the exact same time.
And the only person who discharged a firearm was Officer North.
That's correct.
How many times did Officer North shoot at Mr. Carthens?
It was multiple. The exact number I do not have right here in front of me, so I don't want to give you an incorrect number.
Do you know if it was more than 5 times?
It was approximately, it might have been 6. It was around 5 or 6. Again, I don't want to give an incorrect number.
And to the best of your you don't believe that Mr. Carthens was shot in the foot?
To our knowledge, he wasn't shot at all. He was discharged from the hospital, and we were told he had no gunshot wounds. We had EMS ambulance personnel check him out on scene. They said he was fine. We ourselves, as the police department, had him transported to Northside Hospital, and at Northside Hospital, he was discharged. Okay. So before even going to the DeKalb County Jail, we made sure to get him any possible medical attention he might have needed.
Okay. Do you know approximately how long he was in the hospital before he was discharged?
I don't have the exact number. I know it was into our evening night shift, which comes on duty around 6 p.m. It was after they were here because there was a secondary officer. The same officer that transported him to the hospital was not the same officer that transported him to the jail.
Was all of your interaction with Mr. Carthens captured on body cam? I know you may not have been wearing a body cam, but any interaction you had with him, did that record on another officer's camera?
It would be on someone's body cam. There were other officers in my presence. I only had contact with him pretty much after he was in custody in the rear of a patrol vehicle. But
Okay.
I'm sure the minimal encounter I had with him is going to be on someone's body cam.
And were any photographs taken of the scene?
There would have been. There were several photographs taken. We called our crime scene out. All of that's going to be documented in the case file.
Okay. Do you know if crime scene took a video?
Uh,
I think he just froze on my end. Did he freeze? Okay.
He did freeze on my end too. Give him a moment.
I don't know if there's a video. I do know there were photographs.
Okay. Do you know how many cartridge casings were collected on the scene?
I don't have that number in front of me at this time.
Do you know if cartridge casings were collected?
There were.
And to the best of your knowledge, was Mr. Carthens smoking a cigarette when he was arrested by other responding officers just standing there?
He was smoking a cigarette. I know it was told to me he was smoking a cigarette at the time he was taken into custody. Apparently, he had lit a cigarette sometime while behind the vehicle before being taken into custody.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if when Officer North asked him to relinquish, or at some point when Officer North asked Mr. Carthen to relinquish the firearm, that was after he had already fired shots in his direction? Is that right?
I would have to review the body cam to be definitive in the sequence of events.
Okay. And Mr. Carthens had a hospital wristband on his arm when he was encountered?
He did.
Okay. And the firearm that he tossed and was recovered, was it loaded?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question without reviewing the crime scene report at this time.
Do you know if Officer North had to reload his firearm during the course of him shooting at Mr. Carthens?
I do not know. I'm unable to answer that at this time.
Have you had any previous dealings with Mr. Carthens?
Me personally?
Yes.
No, I have not.
Okay. Do you know if Officer North had any prior dealings with Mr.
Not
Carthens?
to my knowledge.
Okay. At any time was Mr. Carthens questioned about what happened? I know you said he made some rambling statements, but was he interrogated at any point?
To my knowledge, he wasn't.
Okay. And what time did you arrive on the scene?
Again, I don't have the exact time, but it was after he was in custody in the back of a patrol vehicle.
And do you know how long the encounter was between Officer North, after Officer North encountered Mr. Carthens before he was in the back of the patrol car approximately?
I'd have to review body cam to get you an accurate time.
Sure. One moment. Did you do any investigation to determine what Mr. Carthens was previously hospitalized for?
We reached out to, as I mentioned, that firearm did come from an alternate hospital location. We reached out to confirm if he was at that location on the date that theft occurred. But as far as what he was hospitalized for, no, I did not.
So you don't know if it was a physical illness or a mental health issue or anything of that nature?
I do not.
And the firearm that was taken from the hospital, was that from like hospital security staff? Was it taken from inside the hospital?
No, I believe it was a vehicle break-in and entering auto that occurred that was reported on hospital property.
And was that in DeKalb County?
It was.
I'm sorry, you guys.
Actually,
I just need one pause, I'm sorry, I just need to ask the jail. Are you all trying to log in from another device? Just give me a thumbs up or something so I know to let you in. I don't know what's happening over there.
Yes, can you let us in?
Okay, just making sure. All right, thank you. Sorry about interrupting, guys.
No problem. Officer Howard, sorry,
To
Detective Howard.
no, you're fine. To answer that question, I'd have to check to see the physical location. I'm not sure if that's DeKalb or Fulton, but it was the Emory Hospital.
And do you know
I'm
what?
not.
Wait, let's pause. I don't see Mr.
Yeah,
Carthen.
if we could, yep, wait till they come right back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it looks like they were probably having to use that courtroom for something else, so they were logging on via that. To the jail, if you guys can hear me, can you just turn the video portion back on if you can? We can't continue without it.
All right, Mr. Carthens, is that you? You can just raise your hand to acknowledge that you're Mr. Carthens. All right. And can you hear us, Mr. Carthens?
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. McCreary, do you want to maybe ask the last question before we stop, and then we can keep going?
Yes, thank you, Judge. And Detective Howard, I'll just redirect you and reorient you a little bit and myself. So the vehicle break-in, I think you were saying, I asked if it was in DeKalb County.
More than likely, based on the address, it was Fulton County. It occurred at 501 West Peachtree Street, the Emory parking deck for the hospital at that location.
And do you know the date of that report of the stolen firearm?
Yeah, it was May 20th, so 2 days before this incident.
And best of your recollection is Mr. Carthens was at a different hospital and released from a different hospital, not that one, correct?
We reached out to hospital staff, and hospital staff at Emory, they informed us he would have been at that same location of this vehicle break-in.
Okay.
On the date it occurred.
Nothing further.
All right, any redirect, Ms. Pretty?
No redirect from the study, no other witnesses.
All right, any witnesses for the defense?
No witnesses for the defense, Judge.
Argument?
Judge, just a brief argument as it pertains to the aggravated assault charge, specifically, at least based on the officer's direct testimony, it sounds like no firearm was actually pointed at Officer North. And it sounds like even though it was almost simultaneous, clearly Mr. Carthens was afraid people were after him. He was being attacked. He was being followed. And that it sounds like based on the direct testimony that the taser might have happened first before Mr. Carthens pulled out the firearm. There's no, Mr. Carthens could have been pulling out the firearm to hand it over to Officer North perhaps, and did not actually point or fire the firearm at Officer North. So we would ask that that charge be dismissed. We would submit on the evidence for the remainder of the charges.
All right, Ms. Pretty?
Your Honor, it's the state's position that the state has presented sufficient evidence to meet the probable cause standard for all of the charges as listed. From the testimony of the detective, we did hear today that the officer was attempting to gain compliance from the defendant. The defendant was refusing to comply with the officer. The officer was attempting to detain the defendant. He drew away, drew his arm away from the officer. The officer continued to attempt to obtain compliance. Tased the defendant, which had no effect, and in response, the defendant pulled out a firearm, which is a dangerous lethal weapon that could be used offensively against this officer. And so he in fact did wield a firearm against the officer in this exchange, which we believe is sufficient to meet the probable cause standard for the charge of aggravated assault against the police officer. It placed the officer in reasonable fear of his safety and his life. And so we would ask that you would bind that charge over as listed. Nothing further from the state, Your Honor.
All right, I believe based on the evidence presented, there is probable cause to bind the case over on all the stated charges, all 6 warrants. So I will sign an order to that effect. That will conclude the hearing. And Detective Howard, you may be excused. Thank you for your time.
All right, you as well. Thank you for your time, Judge.
Anything further from either party?
Nothing further from the defense, Judge.
Nothing further from